And we are back. Tonight I sit down with Grace Bauer. Grace is with Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, or FLIC, as they like to be called. This group does an amazing amount of work in outreach to families who are possibly having some problems with their children, and hopefully before the children get involved with law enforcement. These guys do an amazing job, and they have a great array of services to offer. So I definitely want you to sit down and take a listen to my interview with Grace Bauer. Here we go.
We use education, advocacy, and direct action organizing to change children that are involved in the juvenile justice system, primarily communities of color and poor communities. Absolutely. Hopefully, we know about them before they actually make it as far as the detention doors or the cells at the Calcasieu Correctional Center. So hopefully we're involved long before that point when they may be experiencing problems in school or they're needing services in their community that they don't have, the way to get to or they don't know about. So we let them know what their options are, try to be all the time on top of what the community has to offer, figure out where we can find that for them and how to get them to it. A lot of times that's a problem. If you live in one district and you need to go to services in another district, you may not have transportation, or you may have to cross if you're walking through another district that you don't necessarily belong in, and that might be a problem for you. So making sure that they have a way to access what services exist. We have mental health services in Lake Charles, but they're hard to come by oftentimes, and there's a waiting list to receive those kinds of services. And families have to go over to the mental health center to receive those services. And so all of which could be a problem. If you live in North Sulphur like I do and you need to access the mental health office, then you're going to need to drive over the bridge, and there's no public transportation between North Sulphur and Lake Charles, so you may not have a way to get there. And it may fall at a time when your parents are working and you can't get there, and there may be no one to take you. It's also going to cut out your days at school, which causes you a problem later on down the line because now you've missed class time, you've missed assignments, and you have to catch up. So all of those things are barriers to people actually receiving the services that do exist. There's drug treatment. Again, it's at a certain time. It's in a certain place. Can you get to that place? Can you get there at that time? Do you have somebody to wait for you for an hour and a half while you're in there so you can actually go home once you leave there? So we do have services, but they're hard to come by sometimes, and there are a lot of barriers preventing people from receiving those services. Well, we're fortunate that we're able to go to resource fairs. We have a lot of networks in our community, so we know a lot about what's going on. So that makes it easier on us. But families that are isolated in smaller communities, North Sulphur, North Lake Charles, Benton, Starks area, they're not having those same options. They don't know what's actually out there, and there's not one comprehensive place where you can go and get all that information or call somebody on the phone and say, this is what's happening with my child, or this is what's happened with my loved one, and I need to be able to do something. So we just try to figure out through a huge resource book that we created over the last couple of years in Lake Charles that tells us where we need to go to access those services. And in terms of, it's not enough just to fill the need, right? That's one part of the step. The second part of the step then becomes how to address those needs on a larger level. So we need to be in the rooms where folks are talking about needs and bringing up the fact that folks in North Lake Charles do not have access to these services, or folks in North Sulphur don't have access to these services. So it's also letting the other side of the table know, look, you have a whole group of folks over here that need these services but can't access them. What can we do to fix that? What's the solution to that? So it's two sides of it. And then also, typically when you're in one system, social service system, criminal justice system, you're going to encounter another system. If you can teach families to advocate on their behalf in one service system, they can then use that knowledge to advocate on their own behalf throughout all service systems. So it's not a one-time fix. Oh, my son's been arrested. I need an attorney. Okay, we're going to get you a lawyer. We'll help you get a lawyer, but let's see what else we can do. So if this ever happens again, or what could have been done early on to prevent your child from being arrested. So what if there are younger siblings coming up, or if there's still, a door of opportunity for the older child, then we're going to be telling you what those services are and what you might do to prevent that from happening again. FLIC's been all about Since 2000, we began meeting as a support group of families. The Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana had filed a lawsuit along with the federal government against the state of Louisiana for conditions of confinement in juvenile detention facilities, state juvenile detention facilities. And this group of families began to call the JJPL office and say, "You're representing my child." Well, it was a class action lawsuit meant to improve the conditions of confinement. But these families who had never had access, many of them, 90-something% of the kids had waived rights to attorneys. So they had no attorneys to represent them at all at that point. So this was the first access parents had to actually speak to a real live attorney and say, this is what happened. So these attorneys basically gave voice to these families. And then these families began to come together because the then office administrator, Gina Womack, began to call these families together and say, y'all can support each other in this mess, because we were all isolated in smaller communities. Our children had been shipped hours away from us. We had no attorneys. We had no support groups. Our typical support groups, which would have been, the faith-based organizations, and our families were really ashamed that our children had been arrested. We attributed it to being bad parents. The probation officers and the folks that were involved insisted that it was our fault as bad parents. So we were really isolated from anybody that could have provided any real meaningful support to us. So in 2000, they began to come together in Baton Rouge for the first time. And by 2001, Flick had formed an organization that operated under the umbrella of the JJPL up until January of 2007, when we spun off as our own organization, moving from that group of parents to over 900 members across the nation that have become involved in this struggle with us. We waged a huge campaign to close a prison, one of the most successful campaigns ever done around criminal justice reform, juvenile justice reform. Not only did we close the Tallulah facility in North Louisiana, we also were pushing very hard and working very hard to pass a piece of legislation called the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2003, which essentially said we're going to change the way we do business with kids that are in jail. We're not going to warehouse them any longer. We're going to begin treatment services. We're going to create different environments and facilities. We're going to treat the whole child. We're going to treat the whole family. We're going to have family input and Office of Youth Development. Since separating, which was another thing that we had really pushed for, to separate from the Department of Corrections, and Governor Blanco come in and did that, that very thing, separated them, put a firewall between the two, appointed a new director, Simone Gonsolin, to oversee the Office of Youth Development. Conditions of confinement have improved a great deal. The lawsuit was finally ended last year, and we've turned one facility into a Missouri-style facility, which is, Missouri has one of the best deep-end systems in the country. Our legislators went there, looked at it, said it was a good deal. The recidivism rate that Louisiana had, which was near 85% at that time, compared to Missouri's less than 20% recidivism rate, definitely convinced folks that we ought to be doing it in a different way. And we advocated very hard to bring in the Casey Foundation, the Annie Casey Foundation, which has an initiative called the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. They're now in 5 parishes in Louisiana and making some significant strides in changing the way local jurisdictions are dealing with kids. And also the MacArthur Foundation is here, and they're working to address the Children and Youth Planning Boards, which was another piece of legislation that we fought very hard for, so that there would be community voice. That was an essential piece that was missing. There were a lot of professionals deciding what should be done with our children and in our communities. What we realized when we started coming together was that we had a lot of differences. We come from different religious backgrounds. We came from different ethnic groups. We liked different foods. We did different things. We worked different kinds of jobs. We had a lot of differences, but the common ground that we had was that we loved our children very much. And there were a group of folks in the Department of Corrections was saying that our kids were throwaway kids, that they didn't come from families that loved them or cared about them. And we said, no, we're not going to accept that anymore. We're going to stand up to that, because we are here and we do love our children. Something's gone wrong. But where did it go wrong at? We want our children back at home with us. You teach us how to do that or show us how to do it, and we'll do it, because we want our children. So, and there had also been some very tragic incidents that occurred along that fight where young men were brutally beaten and hurt, and a young man died in Bridge City as a result of being hit by a guard, and children were being maced and not fed properly, neglected, definitely were not receiving an education. Things were really bad during that time period, and we were sending a large number of children from the Southwest Louisiana area to the state system, and the folks that were sending them were not bad folks. They just didn't have the resources to address the needs these kids had, and they believed that by sending them into state custody, they were providing an additional set of resources that we didn't have. And over time, what they realized is that we can provide those resources right here. We don't have to have it at a state level. We can have good mental health care in Calcasieu Parish. We can have good drug treatment programs. We can have lots of alternatives to incarceration. We can have after-school programs. We can have school-based mental health centers, which Office of Mental Health has done now. We can do all of this, and we don't have to send our children somewhere else. They belong in this community. This is where they come back to eventually. You may warehouse them for 6 years. Eventually, they're going to be your next-door neighbor. Do you want them to get some help for their problems, or do you just want them to continue into the adult system where we all have to pay? I think, too, there was a day in Calcasieu Parish where we were not sending as many children into the juvenile justice system. We've begun to look at adolescent behavior in this country as the super predator of the 80s that scared the hell out of everybody. Those folks really don't exist. That's media hype that creates these sort of scenarios that makes everybody afraid to go out at night. We're talking about a very small percentage of the population of kids that are actually in that category. Mostly what we have is kids that are drug offenders, petty crimes. These are not children that can't be rehabilitated. These are kids that need a chance. They grow up in impoverished neighborhoods. They don't have a lot of opportunity, and they do what they know. They learn to sell drugs. And then we're all surprised. I have a 17-year-old that I've been working with for a long time, and he has a second grade education, and he always says to us, what else am I going to do? I can't even fill out an application at McDonald's. The truth is, that's all he's ever known. All he knows is selling drugs. And eventually he'll end up in the adult system. But now, is that his fault? Where's the blame lie there? Somebody's failed that child. We have failing school systems that didn't teach him how to read. He can barely write. It's not legible what he does write. He has obviously several, problems that affect his attention span, and it makes him very hard to focus. Now he's 17 years old. He's 6 foot tall. He's a young black man, and a lot of people are scared of him. No one wants him anymore. But we failed him in second grade is when we lost him. We may see the effects of that now, but we failed him in second grade. And all he really wants to do is work on the boats like his dad. But the boat company won't hire him because he doesn't have an education. He can't read and write. He can't fill out log reports. It's a very sad situation, and we'd like to think that there's only a few kids like that are falling through the crack. But with a nation having problems with the school system like it is, a nation impoverished, so many folks impoverished, low wages, no health care to get the things that you need when you really need it early on, you're going to see this trend more and more where kids are falling through the cracks. And eventually, and if it was just, the sad thing is that we're still very much a racially divided country. And as long as it's African American and Latino kids falling through the cracks, there's not a whole bunch of folks paying much attention that really matter and that can make a change. But when it's a whole bunch of white kids falling through the cracks, then somebody wants to pay attention. And that's one of the reasons that I am where I'm at today, because I was a white woman with a white child in the system. And folks noticed that there was something wrong about that. As long as there were 25 other African American boys in there with him, no one's saying anything. But when it's a white woman, then somebody's paying attention. And I got the ear of people that would listen to me. I had options. Lots of families don't have those options. That what we've done is ignore the problem, and we've pushed it off into another area, which has been the juvenile justice system. So 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if I was misbehaving at school, the principal got on the phone and called my mom. My mom came to the school, you know, I'm sure I got a good talking to if that was the extent of it once I got home. And I went back to the next school the next day and everything was fine. Today, a kid misbehaves and a lot of times law enforcement's brought in. So again, we've turned adolescent behavior into criminal behavior. Kids are not committing, you know, these atrocious crimes. They're smoking a cigarette in the bathroom. They're skipping a class. They don't go to the pep rally at the end of the day, you know. I know of one little boy that was suspended for stealing a school lunch. When the way I was brought up, if a child wanted to eat, you fed him. Why would we say a child's stealing a school lunch? Well, come to find out that the federal government subsidizes the first lunch the kids have. So on the second lunch of the day, he didn't have enough to pay for that lunch. So they accused him of stealing the lunch. Was he really stealing the lunch? He was hungry. We should feed him because he's hungry. When we begin to criminalize behavior like that, that's a serious, serious issue. It's not about our kids. It's about the adults in the community that are making decisions like that affect children. And one step into the detention center door, one step into the court system, you're creating something that you can't get back from them.
Absolutely.
Every day that they're not in that classroom, that's something you cannot give back to them. No matter how sorry you are, no matter if somewhere down the line an adult decides it was a bad decision and, you know, removes whatever barrier was put in place, you can't give them those days back. You can't give them that socialization back that they get from their classmates. Isolating them in schools, alternative schools, to me is a very bad choice of decisions for folks in this area. We have an alternative school where very few children are actually passing the grade. It's just a young warehouse, and we know that when kids are in alternative school, often the next step is going to be the detention center. And I think our folks at our detention center in Calcasieu Parish have done a really good job to make it a safe place to be. I think they're very progressive thinking in terms of what's best practice, what's best standards. They've reached out to national allies to know what the right things are to do. They use a lot of different programming. They provide a lot of different services. Still, the best detention center in the world is not a place for a child. A child should be with their family, should be in school, should be in the places that they belong every day, playing basketball, doing the things that they enjoy doing, not locked up in a detention center.
Right.
I think it's typical of Americans to look at that 3-second soundbite and go, yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
Right.
But I think the common person needs to understand that there are reasons we see these things. The prison industry in this country is a fast-growing industry. We're building prisons. We're opening a new 700 or 800 bed prison every week in this country. There has to be people to fill those beds. Otherwise, investments were not spent wisely. You begin that trail by putting kids in the juvenile justice system. Later, they end up in the adult system, and therefore we fill the beds that we've built. Because otherwise, you didn't make a good investment with your money. And prison industry is a huge industry in this country. We went from a very small budget in the early 80s to, it's like 400% gains over the last few years, the last couple decades. So the prison industry is definitely putting a lot of people to work, and it's making a lot of people a lot of money. Anybody that's a parent should be concerned with whatever's going on at your child's school. If you're a parent, that makes you part of the ballgame, whether you want to be or not. Whether your child ever makes it to the juvenile justice system, you should still be involved in this, because the fact that your children go to school with my children. And it's expensive to incarcerate 2 million Americans in this country. Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the country. That's costing us a lot of money that could be better spent on improving the public schools, which goes across the board. Whether your child's in trouble or not, your child's still going to reap the benefits of a better public education system. the infrastructure of the cities and the towns where we live will improve because we're not spending a massive amount on prisons. Again, we're putting it into the community where everybody has a piece of that pie. By putting it just in a prison system, we're limiting a certain number of folks. And it's not necessarily a resource, but we're still limiting a certain number of folks to that pie. Once you take so much of our budgets that going into prisons and you put it out there for a whole community, then the whole community will begin to reap benefits, not just my child that's been in the jail system, in the criminal justice system, but all kids. And it also helps to rebuild and heal the social fabric that's been just ripped apart in this country by racial tensions and all of these different things that go on in the country that have just broken down the communities that we once knew and enjoyed very much. As my own son, I think he feels like his options are very limited, and I work really hard as a mom to let him know what options are out there and always beating the bushes to find additional things. But I think once you're in that system and you sort of start down that road, it's very hard to turn it around. And first you're labeled a bad kid, and, then later you become a criminal adult, and, all of these negative things that go around folks that are in jail. You lose your right to vote, so you lose your voice in the community as a whole. You oftentimes are not able to get the job that you would like to have because of your criminal past. Lots of things affect that, and I think if you're in a violent facility, that changes something in you that I don't know that this society is even prepared to begin healing now. And there are so many kids out there that have been raped, both literally, but also mentally and emotionally. They've been stripped of their ability to make choices for themselves and told that all their choices are bad. And so that costs them their self-esteem, and they're not able to later make decisions that may be the right decision at that point in time. It just happened to be the wrong decision the first go around. But we strip that from people. We strip that away, and we tell them that they have no rights in this society as a convicted person. And a lot of people that I know are convicted folks, and I would love to work alongside them every single day because they're great people and they have so much to contribute to this society. I think there's something about Flick that's been very unique in terms of grassroots organizations, in that this organization belongs to the people that make up this organization. There's never a decision made or anything carried out without consulting as many members as we can. And we never utilize anything that we can't give to the whole group, or share, bring back and share with everybody. Because we're about building leaders in our community, from the community, not people that are from outside telling what we are to like or we are to do or we are to think. We're actually empowering folks to be in community meetings and be able to speak their minds in ways that other people can hear them, which oftentimes we know is a problem, that folks don't hear us when we're ranting and raving, but they can hear us when we say the right terms and use the language that other folks use. And so I just think it's a very important piece for folks to realize that we're about empowering people and making them their own voice and sharing that with as many people as we can, as far and wide as we can. We are a statewide organization. We have a website at www.flic, that's fflic.org. We have an office in Lake Charles, one in New Orleans. We have 2 additional chapters in Lafayette and Shreveport. The local number is 337-562-8503. We're listed in the phone book under Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. We're often out in your community at community events wanting to hear what people have to say so that when we go to a meeting, we can bring people's voices to that table. We are often at the courthouse doing outreach to families that are at the courthouse during juvenile court. We're in the community centers, both in North Lake Charles and in other parts of Calcasieu Parish and other neighboring parishes, so that folks know we're there. We at least get out there. There's a small amount of us doing a lot of volunteer work that are getting the word out there. And We're always at the office, so somebody can call and leave a message, and we'll get back to them as soon as we get there.
Thank you so much, Grace, for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to sit down with us and tell us about Flick. Flick is an amazing organization that I would strongly recommend you click on over to their website at fflic.org. There you'll be able to find out more information about them and also reach out to them. They are very interested in growing their organization here in the greater Lafayette area. I'd also like to point out, just as a point of personal indulgence here, that we also have another great organization here as well called the Family Tree. You'll want to check out their website at thefamilytree.ws. There's a lot of information and resources to families out there, specifically parenting and the parenting classes that they have. Definitely click on over to their website and tell Maria that we sent you here from Blue Mondays. But regretfully, that's all the time we have for this week. We definitely want to remind you Blue Mondays is here each and every Monday night at 9 p.m. on AOC Channel 15. Here we'll take a look at all the different issues and give you what our thoughts are, at least for this week. We hope you enjoy the show. Also remind you to click on over to my column tomorrow morning on theadvertiser.com called The Left Blog. There you'll be able to see what my thoughts are, and this week I'm taking on the draft. That's right. I think it's time that we need to start reconsidering the draft. I know, it's a big switch from what my opinions used to be. But that's going to have to wait until tomorrow morning. Until next week, I'm Stephen Handwerk, and for Ruth, Barbara, Danny, and really all of us here at Blue Mondays, we'd really like to thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules and sitting down with us each and every Monday night. We greatly appreciate it. And with that, good night, and please take care of each other.
Respect. One of the simplest ways of showing it is by simply returning a person's phone call. At the Glenn Armentor Law Corporation, we not only return every call, we also take whatever time is necessary to make sure you completely understand your personal injury case and what it will take to win it. The Glenn Armentor Law Corporation, where a fair settlement is no accident.